Hello, I'm Des Lally, and you're welcome to the 44th Clifden Arts Festival. It was a privilege and an honour to talk to the renowned actor and author Gabriel Byrne about his new memoir, Walking with Ghosts, which has become a bestseller. And in our conversation, Gabriel reflects on his early life in Dublin and also on some aspects of his work in America. I think you'll find it a very insightful and illuminating talk. And as Gabriel is no stranger to Connemara, he speaks very fondly of his visits here as well. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Gabriel Byrne. So Gabriel, you're welcome to Clifden Arts Festival. This is our 44th year, Clifden Arts Festival, and we're very privileged to have you here. We'd prefer to have you in person, my friend, but maybe you'll join us at some stage in the future, but it's lovely to speak to you. And really what we're speaking to you today, Gabriel, about is your book, Walking with Ghosts. And like the reviews have been fantastic. In the Irish Times, the Independent, and the Guardian, the response to the book has been amazing, and is flying off the shelves in the Clifden bookshop. And so, I just wanted to ask you, in reading Walking with Ghosts, I found myself really drawn into the world, not so much of the film world and the Hollywood world, but really into the world of, of Paganini and of Ned, and the relationship you had with them. And you kind of, in the book, you start off paragraphs with, this is the street where Paganini lived. This is Ned's house. So you're bringing us really into the streets where you grew up. That was important for you. And can you bring us back to those streets for a moment, Gabriel, and tell us why you chose these figures, ghosts from your past, from many people that you would have known?
Yeah, well, the first thing, as you said there, Des, is that it's not a book about Hollywood or films or acting, only tangentially in how they relate, how that world might relate now and then to the world that I was trying to depict, which was essentially a world that's gone. The theme behind the book, it's called Walking with Ghosts because it's about the ghosts of people who have gone, the landscapes that have changed. It's about memory, and it's about the past. And the characters that I drew on, you see, the thing is, when you're grown up, you don't realize that these people are multifaceted, unique people, characters they're called. But when you're grown up, you don't really notice what they do. They just are part of of your landscape. Well, my father used to call the area he used to call it the theater of the street. And he maintained that, all the people that lived in the street and in the streets around were like characters from a novel. And it was a throwaway remark that he made many, many years ago. And it came back to me. And I realized that no matter where you go, every town, every village, every housing estate has its own characters. It has its own invisible novel going on all the time, if we just choose to look at it that way. And Paganini was he was a plumber who was a man who worked 14 hours a day all his life. And he would come home in the evening, and his wife would have the dinner ready for him and put a glass of milk out for him. And then he would go into the what they called the good room, the sitting room, and he would take down his violin and he would start to play. And in summertime, he'd leave the window open. So we'd be playing football outside, and you'd hear his music coming out through the window. And he played all kinds of things, you know, like little waltzes, but he also had a go at Bruckner and, you know, the famous violin concerto. I remember that. It was only years later that I thought, oh, that's what he was playing, when I heard it properly for the, you know, when I got older. But occasionally, unpredictably, the music would go silent, and everybody knew that Paganini was being followed by the Black Dog, and his step would lose its jauntiness. He wouldn't smile, and looking back on it, he was a man who suffered from periodic depression. That's really what it was. And then, just as inexplicably, 3 weeks or a month or 2 months later, the music would start again. And I remembered him as somebody who was probably suffering, though nobody actually realized what it was that he was suffering from. So I began to look at all the characters in those, and I realized that they all had their own identity, they had their complexity, they had their they cast a kind of spell. And I think it was maybe it was Blake who said, I could be wrong, but who said that you know, the universe is contained in a grain of sand. And I realized that the universal, the local is the universal. It's what Kavanagh did beautifully, where he even has a line where he talked about out of such, I'm paraphrasing now, out of such mundane things, Ulysses was made. So the world is around us, and the characters that we might look for in a novel and find exotic are all there. And so when I went looking for those characters, they just tumbled out one after the other. And I had to put a stop to it and say, I can't have all these people all clamoring to be in the book. They're going to have to wait in line, and I'm just going to pick the first, you know, 5 or 6. But the idea of ghosts, walking with ghosts, is it's the people who have gone who walk with you in terms of memory, what they said, what kind of lives they lived. And there's nobody mentioned in the book, except maybe 1 or 2 small reference to anybody who's alive, because I wanted to examine the way our memories work in relation to the past. And that is that we jump from the present to the past without even noticing it. And the past intrudes more and more in our lives, I think, as we get older. And it begins to take on a significance, and it comes to juxtapose the present in a very meaningful way. So I wanted to look at all those things that are gone and have passed and see what way they connected to the present, and what way those people and those events influenced the kind of person that I became. And it's not a walk down memory lane. It's not a sentimental, you know, nostalgic trip to the Ireland that actually never existed, that we all sometimes sing about. But it was, I tried to make it as honest and as truthful as I possibly could. And in a memoir, which is very different to a novel, as you know, Des, like a novel, you have freedom, you have great freedom to wander, and you can give various characters various things to say. But in a memoir, on every page, you're confronted with the idea, is this the truth? And if it is the truth, do I say it? And if I do say it, am I prepared to take the consequences for saying it? So I was very much aware all the way through that I didn't want to let anything into it that I couldn't stand over and say, that is the truth, and that happened.
Gabriel, your style of writing, the way you actually wrote the book, it draws the reader in, it drew me in, to the point that the ghosts in the book were made so real to me. I could actually see that act of, I suppose, of revolution that Ned makes about lighting the gas light in his house that he moves into. And I could see that light, and I could feel his courage in doing that, to revolt against bureaucracy. And likewise, like the grease monkey, you know, she really sprang out to me as such a vibrant, full of life figure. And it's the way you wrote it, and you gave voice, Gabriel. Again, different voices. It's almost Joycean in the sense that you have the adolescent voice, you have the childhood voice, that speaks so clearly to the reader. If I never knew Gabriel Byrne, and if I never knew Gabriel Byrne, the actor, I would see this book, and I see this book as a very revelatory work. And the question I'd ask you is, what writers, or any writers, influenced you in the style of your writing? Because that gift really springs out from the book as of Gabriel Byrne, the writer.
Well, thank you, Des. That's that's a great question. And I suppose, like a lot of people, my forays into reading began when I was a teenager. There weren't that many references around to guide you on the road to life, if you like. So I looked in literature for myself. I suppose it's a kind of an adolescent narcissistic thing to do, to say, where am I in this? And not my exact person, but how could I identify with these characters that would throw light on the world that I was living in? And I started off with the Irish writers because I felt that they were close to me. And I began with Brian Moore, and then Ben Kiley, and Sean O'Fwillan, Frank O'Connor, Liam O'Flaherty, all the great Irish writers. And then I moved on to the English writers, the kitchen sink guys in the early 60s, like Alan Sillitoe and Stan Barstow and John Brain. But they also spoke in a way that, say, I don't mean this in any derogatory way, but that posh middle class Kingsley Amis type literature just didn't speak to me. And I remember in Dublin, the first one to do that was Lee Dunn, who wrote Goodbye to the Hill. And it was just two, a couple of streets away from where we lived. And I thought, here's a guy writing about Dublin and mentioning places in Dublin that I knew. And then I moved on to various other writers, and I now read indiscriminately all over the place. But they say that a writer is a reader who tries to emulate. And I think there's a great deal of truth in that. Because when I tried to start writing much earlier, when I was younger, and I did a couple of things for radio and so forth, I was trying to imitate a writer that I admired. Whereas the objective should be to find your own authentic voice. And that requires a great deal, I think, of missteps and trial and error. And what I've come to admire in literature is exactly what you've just said. And I'm flattered that you would think that simplicity, no ornamentation, no desire to be, cycling down the hill without your hands on the handlebars, just unadorned, simple prose, but to try to create sensually the world, so the sights, the sounds, the smells of that world. That was very important to me, and I think that's probably that was probably the most important thing to me, to try and make that world as believable and as real as possible, and only using words that would illuminate that. I originally wrote it, believe it or not, Des, I originally wrote the whole thing in verse, and my editor said, you'll sell 2 copies one for yourself, and then one to keep in to give as a Christmas present. I went back and I read it, but what remained from that exercise was the rhythm of the sentences, and so I exactly what you said. I knew that I had a story, but it wasn't like the most amazing story of all time. What was going to keep it afloat was the language and the writing. Otherwise, there was no point in doing it. And so I was nervous about putting it out there because, I revere great writing. I revere it, and I revere writers more than I do actors, to be honest. And I think that what I set out to do was not what I achieved. I know that sounds daft, but you can have an idea that you want to do something and you're totally convinced this is it. And then it turns out to be something completely different. But I found that a lot in life. I found it in cinema and on the stage and so forth. You have to have some place that you're headed towards. How you get there is what's important, not the actual getting there. And if you ever think about people who climb mountains, they don't spend a great deal of time on the top of the mountain walking around the flag. They get up there, they plant the flag, and then they're on the way back down again. For them, it's the journey upward, and getting there is an achievement. Planting the flag is the achievement, but that's it. And so the next mountain awaits. And I thought it was going to be a pretty simple thing. I looked at the mountain and I thought, that's climbable. And then I was halfway up and I thought, I can't even see the top now. I need to go back down again. I'm making heavy weather of this metaphor, but it taught me a great deal about myself, and it taught me a great deal about how difficult it actually is to put anything, whether it's a performance or whether it's a painting, a poem, or a memoir, a novel together, how difficult it actually is. And I wanted to make it look like it wasn't that difficult, if you know what I mean. I wanted to make it look like it was simple.
Yeah, there's a marvelous musicality in the memoir, Gabriel. You refer to songs. I'm thinking of South of the Border or
Right.
El Paso, Kevin
Yes.
Barry, and Hear the Wind Blow, and songs like that. And there's that kind of musicality in it as well. But you are you're tough on yourself, Gabriel, in the memoir. You say, I felt a failure, a failed plumber, a failed priest. And also, Gabriel, you question in the memoir your own betrayals, and I'd just like to ask you about that. Whether it be guilt or whatever. I particularly think of the owl episode in the novel. Of course, the grease monkey, and that seems to prey on you, so to say. I got the sense of that preyed on you. And yet, at the end of that grease monkey section, you give a great sense of hope. The two of you are driving on a road trip in America. But so does this sense of failure and your own guilt at betrayal, does that worry you still?
I think that, again, going back to what I feel the essential truth of what I was trying to do is that I wanted to be honest about myself. I think we all carry with us these ghosts, if you like, the ghosts of guilt, regret, shame, dishonesty, betrayal. We carry those things with us. And do you find resolution in admitting to them? I don't know. I don't blame myself for that stuff anymore. I realize that I'm just human. But yes, I regret that I betrayed two people, because it's not that difficult to move from betraying other people in small ways to betraying yourself in ways.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that people recognize betrayal and say, yeah, I know what that feels like, that to me validates the reason for doing it. In regard to shame and guilt and regret and so forth, they're things that I think I carry from my childhood, and I think I carry them from my education. There are some people who went through the Irish education system and it didn't bother them, and they're very happy with how it went down, but not me. I think if you were a sensitive creature, which I was, being beaten and humiliated every day was something that remained with me for my life. And I remember a teacher saying to me, you'll never be any good for anything except a pick and shovel. And I always remember that phrase. And anytime I pass guys that were digging on the road, I think to myself, look at the way those guys are working, how hard those guys are actually, the sheer hard work that those guys have to do. It was such an insult to those people, but he was saying it to me as a derogatory thing because I wasn't going to be any good at it. Those things stay, they stick inside you. And even when success or, perceived success comes along, that part of you is still there. And it's not like, we have this vision of other people's lives where they're all totally happy and dancing around the place because they've achieved everything in life. That's a delusion. That's illusory thinking. Nobody gets through this life without suffering. And the reason I wanted to be honest about all that stuff was because I wanted people to say, yes, I recognize those things. I have those things too. And if somebody can speak them out, it makes them less of a burden to carry through life.
Yeah, because those sections of the book, as I said, moved me in many ways, Gabriel. I just wanted to ask you about having met you on a couple of occasions. It struck me that silence, solitude, and quietness seem very necessary to you. And how do you find that? I know maybe in the present circumstances it's not difficult to find, but silence, solitude, and quietness in the world you live in, maybe, or I should say the world you work in, you find it difficult to leave aside that time for Gabriel Byrne, just the me time.
Oh, I think that's tremendously important, no matter where you are or what you do. But without sounding pedantic about it, I think that you have to nourish the soul. That's really what it is. Quietness, silence is essential to me, and I will find it wherever I am. I'll find it in the middle of New York, walking down the street. I'll find it. Just like somebody said, okay, just because you live in a city like New York doesn't mean you can't still be connected to important things. And I'd be walking down the street one day and I'll see growing out of a crack in the wall, I'll see a wildflower, and I'll say, there it is. It's there. It's all around. And silence, and like, I'm not religious by nature anymore. Spiritual, yes, but not religious. But I'll often go into a church and just sit down, and because a church captures silence in a way that few places can. And you don't have to be going in to pray, but the act of just sitting down in silence is, to me, a kind of prayer. And I always come out refreshed, and that could be an Episcopalian or Methodist or Catholic church, and just sitting in silence restores me, revitalizes me. And that's why, out in Connemara, I would go for walks like for miles and miles and forget where I was. So I've always sought that out, and I'm introverted by nature. I'm not an extrovert. I'm not a party person. In fact, I find being in the middle of a crowded party very difficult. I never quite know how to react. I'm much better one-on-one. My ideal thing is sitting by a fire, talking to one other person or two or three people, and, being able to listen and being able to contribute and talk, and then be out like Wordsworth was, out in nature, and been revitalized by, the wind and the rain. And some people would say, "Ah, stop romanticizing," but I found that everywhere I've gone. I seek it out.
Yeah. Gabriel, would you read a small passage from the book for us? Just give us your voice reading your work.
Okay, I'll try, Des. Let me see. Yeah, this is the beginning of the book, where the very opening of the book, where I went back a few years ago to the road where I was born and reared in Dublin. And at that time, where our road ended, the countryside began. And there were farms and fields of barley and wheat and orchards and so forth. And so a couple of steps and you were in the countryside. When I went back to that place, it had now become the hill where I used to go as a child was now a parking panoramic vista for cars. And there was a motorway going through those fields. And all those farms had gone. And I stood there looking out over it, and I realized that we take our landscapes for granted. The landscape does not belong to us, and it's, even if it appears not to be changing, it's changing. And when I looked that day, I saw, I was reminded of my father and myself one day going out for a walk, and we were caught under the trees with the rain. And look up there where the houses of the new estates are now. The road to the countryside once began. Farms on either side, orchards, fields of barley and corn. I remember my father teaching me to ride a bicycle in the laneways among the high hedges. I wobbled and tumbled into the ditch, and he made me get up again. And soon I was speeding down the hill, the wind in my face. And one day I reached the bottom without falling, and I let out a whoop of joy. And soon I was riding down with my feet on the handlebars. And I wished everyone would see me, especially Mary Foley, and be full of admiration for me being so brave and heedless of danger. My father taught me how to read simple things, the bundling of clouds or the seconds between thunder and lightning, how to smell snow in the wind, and how to know by the night sky if frost will come. He taught me the names of trees, wildflowers, and birds. I remember a day standing beneath the trees to take shelter from the rain. My father and I watched a field being plowed. The horses plodding through the black turned earth, backs slick with rain, a man walking behind them. Hike, he said when he wanted them to stop, and gup when he wanted them to go on. Crows and gulls circled and shrieked, grub greedy on the air behind. Beyond the field, a rain curtain covered the mountain. The man turned the beasts at the end of the field, the blade catching the light and flashing. A sudden wind came up, making leaves flap like the wings of insects. And just as suddenly the sun came out, and then the last drops, like when you pop your lips together. And the hills were clear again. A rainbow appeared in the blue-black sky. The horses put their heads together and made a noise like a sneeze. The man held the shaft of the plough, straining this way and that, cutting into the black earth. Once they made a mistake and he pulled them back. They stomped their heavy hooves and started again. One had a white stripe on his face as if painted there. The other had white socks. The long strips of cut earth narrowed the field with each turn, and the man stopped to light a cigarette out of the wind's way as the animals munched from nosebags, having their dinner and a rest. He is the last of his kind, my father said. I carry that day like a photograph in my heart. I had never felt so close to him as in that silence.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. I'll just finish off shortly, Gabriel. But I want to ask you, in the memoir, you're very honest about your own struggles with alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And probably one of the most disturbing portions of the book was your encounters when you were in the seminary, and your writing skills. Again, I keep going back to this. You make it so real and so horrible, in where the reader wants to scream at you through the book to run, to run, to run. I felt that when the priest in his dressing gown, and you were in the room, and you just sensed your terrifying vulnerability and his power and manipulation. And I'd like to ask you, if you were meeting someone who is struggling with an addiction, or who has struggled with memories of abuse, how or what would you say to them to bring them through that darkness, or to help them through your own experience?
Well, in relation to addiction, my feeling about that is that it's a prison. It's a dark prison out of which there seems no escape. And yet, it is only by admitting to oneself that there's a problem. There's great hope. There's help. There are people who have been through the same struggle, and you can get out of it. It's not a moral failing. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're allergic to a substance called alcohol, or you're allergic to drugs, and you've become addicted. That is not your fault. Addiction is a major worldwide plague. And it's as relevant in Australia, America, Canada, Norway, Ireland, it doesn't matter. Addiction is part of the world that we live in. But you can get out of that dark prison by confiding in somebody, by finding the courage inside yourself to say, look, I have a problem. How can you help me? The Beatles had a great song. You know, it's amazing to think that at 23 and 24, they were writing such profoundly wise things. A song like Help. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. And I do appreciate you being around. Won't you please help me? To reach out, to have the courage to say, I'm going to push through my shame. I'm going to push through what people think about me or say about me. And I want to be free. Because when you're the victim of an addiction, you are not free in your soul. You just are not. You are beholden to that addiction when you wake up and when you go to sleep at nighttime. But you can break out of it a day at a time. And that is liberation. It is freedom for the soul in a way that you can't even imagine. I stopped because I got sick to death of hangovers. I got sick to death of not being in control of my life, of everything, being about, drinking and being around people who drank and so forth. And it's a very, very, very lonely place to be, despite the fact that you're surrounded by people who all look like they're having a great time. There's too many people who have become, who are dead because they couldn't stop it, who died as a result. People who are killed in car crashes, domestic abuse, all those things. It is a prison, but courage is the key to get out of the prison and not to blame yourself. The second thing I would say in relation to abuse is more or less the same thing. It's not a moral failing. You have nothing to be ashamed of. As long as you keep that within yourself, that perpetrator wins, because he's making you suffer inside. Because the key to the prison out of that, again, is removing shame, secrecy, and silence from your world and saying, I'm not ashamed of who I am. I didn't do anything wrong. And I want to be free. I want to be in touch with who I am, who my essential self is. And abuse, whether it's domestic abuse or sexual abuse or emotional abuse, they rob you of that. And they've taken your freedom, and alcohol and drugs take your freedom. So courage to admit it to yourself, and then the courage to say to one other person that you love and trust, I've got to get help for this. I've got to help myself in both cases. And you will not believe, in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you say, my God, I never thought I could do that. And the world becomes a very, very different place. And you get back in contact with who you are, who you're meant to be. Because, again, without sounding pedantic about this, the soul is a garden, and you have to keep it watered and flowered. And if you don't, it just, as Shakespeare said, it turns to seed. It turns to weeds. And so no shame, no secrecy, no self-blame. We're not to blame for addiction, and we're not to blame for abuse. So I pray that, I say pray in the sense, I wish that, I wish for people who are suffering like that, that they find the courage to take the first step, which is to say to themselves, I'm sick of being on the couch. I'm sick of hangovers. I need somebody to help me with this.
Actually, those words are very helpful, Gabriel, and I know will be helpful to a lot of people, particularly hearing them from yourself. I'll finish up, Gabriel, by just saying to you, you're no stranger to Connemara, thankfully. What do you feel when you drive past Mam Cross and you're coming out here into Connemara? I know you've been here on many occasions. What does Connemara say to you, to Gabriel Byrne?
Better minds than I have described Connemara, and other people have tried to. I do believe that landscape has a spirituality to it. I believe it has a soul. And when I go to Connemara, I'm aware of many things. I'm aware of time, how ancient that landscape is, how complex at the same time it is, and that although it looks as if it's this beautiful, unchanging place, it is changing, and the people are changing, and the 21st century has come to Connemara. It's no longer this mystical place that people romanticized, and they probably always romanticized Connemara because of the landscape. It seems to me that it's got that beauty, which we all know, but it's also got it's also dealing with the realities of the 21st century. And I can see the changes, the huge changes. The last time I was there was last year, I think. The Connemara people themselves are exceptional. They're not like people from anywhere else in Ireland. And I find the peace when I get there, and I like to just wander around it. And whether I go into Clifden for a bit of a break from the landscape, there's no part of it that I don't. When Wordsworth wrote Tintern Abbey, he talked about looking at his younger self. And his younger self, he said, bounded like a doe over the landscape. He couldn't rest. He didn't know what to be doing. Oh, there's that, there's this, running. That's the way I used to be with Connemara. I couldn't get enough of it. I was running from here to there, restless. And now, like Wordsworth over Tintern Abbey, I'm happy to sit and be in a few places and absorb into me in a tranquil way, what the place is about. Anybody who wants to get an understanding of Connemara should read Tim Robinson's book, Connemara.
Yeah.
Who said it so much better than I could. I'm just talking about my particular feelings when I get there. I feel at home in the place, and I hate leaving it, but that's the way it is. I have
Gabriel,
friends who live, and I think they're so lucky to be living there. And they say, "Oh, Jesus, no, you wouldn't want to be here on a Wednesday afternoon in February when the rain is lashing you out of it and the wind is coming in." That's the reality of Clifden in winter.
Well, Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us for the 2021 Clifden Arts Festival. We hope, and there's a standing invitation to you to come over at any time and join us during the festival. But particularly, I want to thank you for the gift of your book to so many readers throughout Ireland and the world who have been moved by it, like myself, who have moved into the book almost and been touched by so many of the ghosts you write about. And to me, they're no longer ghosts. They're very, very much alive, and they're very much real to me. And that was made really evident through the skill of your writing, Gabriel Byrne, writer, author. I think it's very important to recognise that. So Gabriel, thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Des, and I'm really looking forward to being there in person. Zooms are fine, but it's not the same thing as being sitting across a table from somebody. And thank you so much for inviting me, Des. It's an honor to talk to you, and I really hope that this year, the festival, it would be fantastic to have it with real people sitting opposite each other, and fantastic that it's been going so long and it's such a success, and it's a wonderful thing to put into the world.
Well, you know, the arts, you spoke there about Connemara, and we feel so strongly about the arts. That's a grand word, but whether it's a fella playing a tin whistle or whether it's a concert orchestra, whether it's, you know, an internationally known author or whatever, to give voice to the arts in rural Ireland and in Connemara. And we're so lucky to be supported by so many good and close friends. On the back of your book, I see Colin McCann has written something. He mentions Frank McCourt, he mentions Nuala Fuelon, he mentions Edna O'Brien, all of whom have been to Clifden, and also Richard Ford has been here as a guest. So the connections are there. As James Heaney said, it's like a wicker basket. The weaves and webs of friendship reach far, and even on Zoom they reach far. So Gabriel, give our love, Anna, to you and to your family, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Des. It was a pleasure. Thank you indeed.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to encourage all our audiences and participants to go out to your local bookshop and purchase these books, and also to support your local bookshops. And we're so fortunate in Clifden to have the Clifden Bookshop, which is a beacon for literature and the arts in Connemara.